Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Megan. I am a former nurse practitioner turned functional health practitioner, and I have a heart for Jesus. I don't know if everyone in here is a Christian, but I am a Christian, and what I share today will be through a Christian lens. But I also want you to know if you're not a Christian, I honor you and I respect that, and I'm glad that you're here. I just hope to shine light on a different lens through the nervous system. I'm dedicated to helping women break free from survival mode and reclaim an embodied faith so they can become aligned, resilient, and fully present in the life God calls them to live. And I do this through biblically rooted nervous system care, metabolic support, and mineral balancing. My experience and my passion behind root cause medicine stems from my own journey. I'm a breast cancer survivor, and after chemo, I dealt with chronic fatigue, chronic gut issues, hormone imbalances, really bad anxiety, major depression, and complex grief after I lost my mom to ovarian cancer. So, when I share these things with you all, I want you to know that my experience is both professional as a practitioner and as a patient. And it was very defeating when I was dealing with certain symptoms and I was told, here's another medication. We can't do anything for you. You're just getting older. And so that is kind of what threw me into the functional health space. I have over 10 years of education and 10 years of clinical experience. I'm not going to go into all of these certifications and licenses because I don't think that they matter. And a lot of times I'm having to unlearn what I was taught, to be honest. But I want you to know that I have been working with women one-on-one for years, and I have training in a lot of different modalities. And it wasn't long until I realized that trying to heal your guts and your hormones without a focus on your mindset, your spiritual health, your nervous system is like putting a band-aid on an infected wound. And after working with women for years and recognizing certain patterns in their history and certain patterns in my own, I began digging into nervous system regulation. And as a result, I started realizing that living in a chronic state of stress was depleting my body of essential minerals. Worsening anxiety and depression is contributing to things like low progesterone and gut issues. I was really prone to disconnecting from my physical body, and I didn't realize it until I started learning about the nervous system. I was believing certain stories about myself and the world around me and about God. And I didn't realize how rooted it was in my childhood as well. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I learned how chronic guilt and shame was impacting the way I showed up in my relationships and worsening my social anxiety, how my nervous system was impacting my sex life and libido, especially in my marriage, how overall this impacted my view of God and walk with Him. So I began diving into nervous system regulation, and I experienced a complete transformation, both physically and spiritually. And then I began integrating nervous system work into what I was doing with my clients through a functional health perspective, and I saw their lives completely change and their health improved. And so throughout our time together, I'm going to be sharing a glimpse into what I teach inside my 12-week program. It's called Aligned and Renewed, and it is a self-paced program that helps you dig into caring for your God-designed nervous system through a biblical lens. And I want to pause here and just ask the question, why should you even care about this? And the reason I think that you should care is because I believe a lot of us are stuck in a chronic stress cycle, and it's impacting how we show up in our lives and the health we experience. And I also believe that we repeat what we don't repair. This is how pain patterns and health habits get passed down generation to generation. But I believe if pain can be passed down, then so can healing. And the best thing I ever did in terms of healing was choosing to break the chains of dysregulation. And it wasn't until I quit putting band-aids over my wounds and built awareness that I finally found freedom and broke free from the cycle. And I believe by choosing to dive deep into the depths of your nervous system and take action with some of the things that you learned today, it will set you on a path to break free too. So one thing about your nervous system is that you love context, connection, and choice. And so I've intertwined each of these throughout our time together. And so for context, I'm going to begin with an invitation to come home to your body through a body-based exercise. And then I'm going to introduce you to your limbic system. And we're going to dive deep into the depths of your autonomic nervous system through a faith-based and functional lens. And then I'm going to end by giving you some tangible tips to regulate your nervous system through a biblical lens. And I do want to say that if you don't have a background in nervous system regulation, it can kind of be like learning a new language and just feel like a lot. And there will be a recording that you can watch again. So don't feel like you have to absorb all of this right now. It can be a lot of information. But my hope is that you walk away from our time together with a new respect, love, and awe for our Creator and for your body, and tangible tips to put into practice that equip you to become a resilient, renewed, and regulated woman. And I do want to offer a disclaimer, though I am trauma informed, I'm not a therapist, and the information in this presentation is not meant to be taken as medical advice. And as an additional disclaimer, theories in psychology, science, nervous system, and mental health are often rooted in evolution or New Age beliefs, and I don't personally align with those. I align with a Bible-believing perspective. I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and I believe that our bodies are designed by God. I believe that nervous system dysregulation occurred in the garden when we experienced a broken attachment. Shame, fear, and isolation was entered into the world. And so that's the lens and the framework I'll be teaching through. Before we begin, I just want to set our frame by which we're going to be looking at the nervous system and take you back to the garden for a minute. And I believe that we were created in goodness and wholeness, but when temptation occurred, a broken attachment from God happened, and that is when we developed a need for survival in a broken and fallen world. I believe that's when toxic shame and fear and blame happened. You can kind of see this back in Genesis when God's like, what happened? And Adam's like, this woman that you gave me did this, and he's blaming her. And then Eve blames the serpent. And so you can kind of see where blame happens, and then toxic shame and fear, they hid themselves from God and were previously walking with God. And then throughout scripture and throughout the Bible, I believe that you can see different coping mechanisms that played out in the lives of the people and how they're passed down through generations. And while I believe that we have an opportunity for redemption and wholeness through Christ and the Holy Spirit, I also think that we have to be willing to get really honest with ourselves and name stories of harm that have occurred and take action. And taking action starts by developing an understanding of our God-designed nervous system. So let's pause for an invitation to be fully present. I'm going to introduce you to a body-based exercise. Before we dive into our lecture, I want to invite you to spend some time connecting to yourself internally. In Psalm 131, verse 2, the psalmist writes, "But I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me." I've worked with countless Christian women over the years, and many struggle with calming themselves and embodying biblical peace. And it makes sense given our world where we are constantly overstimulated, and Satan wants us distracted and disconnected because we're less of a threat that way. And so in a bit, the exercise that I'm going to share with you helps you anchor back into the present moment and orient. Another reason I want to invite you to do this exercise is because of your God-given gift of interoception. This is a phrase that was coined by neuroscientist Bud Craig, and he has a wonderful book called How Do We Feel? This is also training by Amy Blackshear, which is someone that I really look up to in the somatic experiencing space. And interoception is the capacity to have a conscious awareness of your internal sensations. You have internal sensations happening all the time, but you might not be aware of them, or you may be overly aware of them, which a lot of my clients struggle with as well. And when we're overly aware of the sensations that are happening in our body, we can sometimes attach certain narratives, especially on social media, to symptoms that might not actually be the right narrative. And we'll talk about that here in a bit. And we have to be really careful about that because it will impact how we view our lives and can keep us running in fear. Our modern world also encourages us to disconnect from our internal sensations. We are constantly overstimulated and distracted. Our upbringing and our parents can also cause us to be disconnected from our internal sensations. For example, if your parents were part of the Clean Plate Club and they're starving children in Africa, I don't care if you're not hungry, you need to clean your plate and finish it. You probably over the years have learned how to ignore your hunger cues. and continuing to eat even when you're full. And if you're not aware of that, it can drive certain behaviors and patterns. And maybe up until this moment, you might have cold feet, your heart may be fluttering in your chest, you may have cold hands, but if you're not conscious of these sensations, it's not interoception. When we are on a health journey, it can be really easy to simply learn head knowledge without embodying it. And as a result, we miss out on a lot of opportunities to explore our interoception. And rather than pausing to apply what we're learning or noticing how it's landing with us, we'll rush to the next thing, to the next protocol, to the next meal plan, and we'll stay disconnected from ourselves, searching for the next best thing. In your God-designed brain, you also have an area called the insula. And we will talk about that more in a second. In your brain, when you look at it with a functional MRI, when you do a mind-body based exercise like I'm going to show you, there are areas that will light up in your brain. Also shown to help people cultivate a deeper sense of empathy, because when you feel felt, you have a greater capacity to feel with others. And so when you complete this body-based exercise, I'm going to ask you in the comment section to just tell me how it lands with you. And please know that as humans, we each describe things with different languages. Maybe you're a poetic person, and so different images and sensations will rise to you, or maybe you're just a concrete person where you're like, I feel relaxed and warm and cold. There's no silly answers and no perfect responses, so just keep that in mind. And then before we begin, I want to give you permission to do something different, because a lot of times this workshop is not focused on trauma, but if you're someone that has been highly traumatized and you don't feel like you have a choice, when someone gives you something to do, it can be really triggering. So I want you to know that you have a choice to do this or not to do it. I would encourage you to do it because it can offer a lot of insight, but if you don't want to, know that you don't have to. All right, so let's get started. And I'm going to bring you guys back up because feeling a little alone here. Minimize you. All right, so close your eyes. And I want you to envision yourself standing in an elevator in your brain. And while you're here, just notice any sensations in your forehead, any tension. Sometimes we harbor a lot of tension and furrow our brows here. And just notice what comes up. And taking your elevator down to your nose, notice your breathing. And down to your mouth. Maybe swallow, noticing the sounds. And take your elevator down to your neck and your shoulders, pausing to notice any tension, any sensations. Down to your biceps, your forearms, and your hands. And squeeze your hands together and release them if they're available to you. And notice if they feel warm, cold, just noticing. Traveling back up to your forearms and your biceps and your chest. Go down to your belly. Notice any sensations there. Moving down to your pelvis and your thighs and your knees and your calves. And down to your feet, pausing to notice if they're cold, if they're warm. Squeeze and release your toes and then wiggle them. And traveling back up to your calves and your knees, your thighs, and your sits bones and your pelvis. And while you're here, I want you to notice what's happening in your body right now. And if you're hovering above your chair in an anti-gravity position, or if you're allowing your chair to fully hold you and be held. And if you're able, soften and melt in your chair. All right. So I would love to hear how that landed with you before we move on. And Margaret, you're going to have to help me read the chat because I can't see it currently.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I'll read anything that comes in. Yeah, Sarah says yawned like 10 times. It's good stuff.
Okay. Anybody else? Did anyone find this hard? So for me, when I started nervous system regulation and tuning in, I would try things like this and I'd be like, I gotta go. Like, I gotta get to the next thing. I can't do this. And I was so annoyed and I couldn't wait for it to be over. And I got curious about that reaction rather than critical. And it turned out that I didn't feel safe in my body. And it really opened up some layers for me to explore. And so if that's you, know that it's okay and just get curious about it. The goal is to become curious and not judgmental. All right. Okay. Any other comments before I move on?
I definitely felt when you were saying are you hovering above the chair? Are you letting the chair support you? I was like, oh, yeah. Like, I'm kind of like, "Grr," and then I was like, oh, actually, yeah, the chair is here to support me. I should kind of let it do that. And then, having the muscles tense unconsciously, not realizing I'm doing it is a big one for me at least.
Yeah, same. I struggle with that too, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's begin by looking at an overview of your nervous system. Your nervous system is broken down into multiple parts. You have a central nervous system, which is your brain stem, and your spinal cord. And then you have a peripheral nervous system, which is your sensory, motor, and autonomic nervous system. And if you look on the right here, you have different parts of your peripheral nervous system, and this is the one we will be focusing on after we talk about your limbic system. With your peripheral nervous system, it's broken down into sympathetic mode, which is fight or flight. Then you have a parasympathetic state, which is the rest and digest. And then you also have a third component of this, which is the ventral dorsal area, which is a social engagement area of your nervous system, and it's how you connect with others. And we'll talk about that after we spend some time on the limbic system from the work of Stephen Porges, because I think it's really interesting to kind of take a peek at how our nervous system impacts our connection to others. But one thing that I want to point out here is that this entire system, your central nervous system, your peripheral nervous system, can be impacted by your in utero experience. Your mother's stress hormones, for example, can impact you and shape your nervous system. Your attachment to your caregiver growing up, toxic shame and fear, your coping mechanism, your relationship to others, harboring resentment, anger, envy, the narrative you believe about the world, trauma, and nutrition and mineral status. Something that women tend to forget about is exploring their birth story. And sometimes when we don't look at how life was when our mother gave birth to us, for example, this was huge for me. My mom was very stressed with me, and I realized that a lot of what I was carrying when it came to my patterns and my ability to regulate was highly influenced by her nervous system. And it's not something to be upset about, it's just to get curious about, because our mothers do the best that they can with the knowledge that they have. But sometimes what we're carrying isn't ours. We mirror our parents. And when we develop that awareness, it helps us break habits and patterns. So let's take a closer look at your brain. You have, if you put your hand up and cross your thumb over your hand to your pinky and then fold your fingers, you kind of have like a little model of your brain. It's not perfect, obviously, but you have your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, which would be in the middle. your limbic brain, and then you have your midbrain. And your prefrontal cortex is responsible for your learning and thinking, your capacity to calmly and rationally make decisions. It's unique to humans. Your limbic brain is given to us for survival. It activates the autonomic nervous system. And two structures, there are a ton of structures we could focus in on the brain, but two structures I want to mention here are the insula and the amygdala. The insula is between the limbic system and the cortex. It has lots of functions. One we just explored, which was with interoception. It also plays a role in empathy, and the more interoceptive you are and the abilities that you have, like I said, the greater empathy you feel towards others. I don't know if you've looked around in the world today, but there's a lot of people that struggle to have empathy towards people. And it makes sense when we think about the brain and how minerals are involved, which we'll talk about later, and how depletion keeps people in a state of survival because it hijacks certain areas of our brain. The insula is also responsible for taking in sensory data from the body and triggering the right survival response. And it's involved in managing pain. Then you have two amygdala, which are located in the limbic part of your brain, and it's behind your eyes. They are behind your eyes. The amygdala is involved in protecting us from danger and triggering our fight or flight responses, and it's also involved in our immune responses. It's almond-shaped and it's fully formed by 15 weeks of gestation, and it's highly shaped by your mother's nervous system. Your hypothalamus activates your endocrine system, and this is one I'm going to point out to you because there's a lot of talk about cortisol and balancing your hormones and regulating your blood sugar. And when we miss the piece of the nervous system, we tend to stay stuck in a cycle, and we'll talk about why. And it has to do with your hypothalamus. Hippocampus is part of your brain, part of your limbic system that balances the amygdala and helps it calm with memory. Like if you see a snake, but it's actually a stick, the hippocampus is like, oh, that's actually a stick. You don't have to fear, and it calms down your system. And I did want to pause and notice the creation between male and female, because down to our brains, we have been created with differences. And this is something I like to point out to women, because when they start learning about the limbic system and the autonomic nervous system, they try to apply their regulation tools to their husbands, and it does not work well because our husbands regulate different than we do because they're created differently than we are. And when we honor that rather than trying to make them into something that they're not, I've watched marriages transform. So a few differences are that women have a larger insula than men, so we tend to be more empathetic and we're better at reading emotional tone and facial expressions. The prefrontal cortex is bigger in women and matures faster. The amygdala is larger in men and fully formed before a man's hippocampus, which is why if you have little boys, for example, they like to be involved in a lot of risk taking. Then we have the hippocampus, which never forgets a romantic encounter, a fight, or tender moments in a woman. Women tend to have a better recall of memories than men because it's larger and more active, and it can be shrunk by severe trauma in both. So let's take a closer look at your limbic system and your stress response. I want you to picture yourself on maybe a camping vacation, and you're with some friends, and maybe you needed some time alone, so you go on a walk in the woods. Maybe you're excited because you found some herbs to forage and wildflowers to bring back to the camp. But as you're heading back, you see a huge growling grizzly bear ripping apart your tent, and you see him before he sees you. So in that moment, your brain will decide what your coping strategy will be based on the information it receives from your amygdala and your past experiences. Your amygdala will assess the situation, and based on what's happening internally and externally through your senses, and based on the message it perceives, in this case, you're in danger, it will kick on your fight or flight response by activating your sympathetic nervous system. It acts faster than your thinking part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, and it's by design. We want it to do that. So very often you're going to respond in dangerous situations before thinking or rationalizing. So it kicks on your survival responses, and your heart rate goes up, your blood flow to your muscles increase, your blood pressure increases, your pupils dilate, and you're ready to fight or flee. So you sprint away before he sees you and gets too close. And in an ideal situation, you get away. You discharge your survival responses, and all the hormones that went along with it calm back down, and your body is able to down-regulate back into parasympathetic mode and rest and digest and repair. But if you cannot fight or flee, you may enter into another response called the freeze response, or playing dead. And your brain then activates your parasympathetic nervous system. Your muscles get tight, you freeze, your breath gets shallow. Your body starts to shut down at a cellular level to conserve energy. And this is known as the freeze or dorsal vagal response. And it happens most often in trauma, severe trauma responses, for example. Now, I bring this up because in our current everyday life, our bears, aka stressors, look a lot different. It's things like overworking, burnout, marriage stressors, relationships, lack of nutrients, lack of minerals, overexposure to toxins, our perceptions and how we perceive others in our relationships. But our physiology reacts the same, and the more stressed we are, the greater wear and tear we experience on the body. This is known as an allostatic load. So when it comes to holistic health and wellness, understanding your limbic system and autonomic nervous system, which we'll dive into more here shortly, is really important because how you perceive threats in your life, your bears, and how you recover is shaped by your early childhood experiences, your internal and external resources like minerals, nutrients, perceptions, and beliefs, your upbringing, and our perceptions are not always accurate. Sometimes we can perceive a situation as dangerous when it actually isn't, and it keeps us in a state of stress. When we do this, whether what we perceive is actually dangerous, physiology will respond the same. And if we're unaware, we'll get stuck in certain patterns and cycles, and that's what we want to break. So let's take a closer look at this with the context of hormones. So everybody's talking about balancing hormones, which I think is great that it's coming into the conversation. However, hormone balance starts with your hypothalamus in your brain. And so if it assesses that your environment is dangerous, it sends a message to your pituitary gland, which sends in a message to your adrenals to stimulate cortisol. And if you look on this side, it impacts so many things. You have your thyroid here, your pancreas here, your adrenal glands, your sex hormones. And if you're stuck in a chronic state of stress, it's going to impact things like progesterone because if you're stressed, your body's like, well, I don't want her making babies, so you're not going to ovulate consistently, and it's going to impact progesterone levels. Your blood sugar is going to be impacted because stress hormones increase blood sugar without food. Your digestion will be impacted because it doesn't make sense for you to digest food if you're running for your life. And again, ideally, we want to respond to the threat that we face each day, use up the glucose, discharge the energy, finish the stress response, and then calm back down and go into regulation. But many of us are staying in a chronically over aroused state or stuck in a state of collapse. And again, it impacts your thyroid, your pancreas, your adrenal glands, and your sex hormones. So this is where when people are constantly like, nervous system regulation is the key to everything, partly true, but not everything. You still need helpful protocols and to peel back layers of compensation. But this is where you get things like anxiety and irritability and all of these symptoms because of how many things are interconnected with the system and how many things are impacted when you're living dysregulated. And then just another thing to consider as a Christian woman is that it's really hard to walk in the spirit when you're constantly living in a state of dysregulation. Things like envy and murder and drunkenness and jealousy, those are things that can be highly tempting when we're constantly depleted or living in a state of reaction. And then we have the God-given gift of neuroplasticity, which is rewiring your brain, which is good news because we don't have to stay stuck in a chronic state of stress. So there are things that we can do to take action. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. I want you guys to do a full body yawn before we dive into anything else. I know Margaret teaches on fascia, and there's different receptors that respond to stretching and opening, and yawning helps you come back to the present moment and focus. So if you want to move around in your chair, take a yawn, do a stretch, we're going to take a closer look at your autonomic nervous system. So your autonomic nervous system not only impacts you physically, but it also impacts the daily stories and narratives that you believe about the world each day. And my favorite quote by Deb Dana is that hopefulness lies in knowing that while early experiences shape our nervous system, ongoing experiences can reshape it, because I think it shines light on the truth in scripture that talks about renewing your mind and brain. There are things that we can do to renew it. We have a hierarchy of our nervous system, and it starts with the parasympathetic state and the sympathetic state, which we just talked about. And the best way to understand this is through this ladder created by Deb Dana. So if you look at this ladder, polyvagal theory is the theory that I'm teaching through, and it teaches us that we move up and down this autonomic ladder. And what I do with clients in my program is teach them how to pinpoint where you are on your ladder and know when you are moving down into sympathetic or dorsal by understanding your triggers. Ideally, when you are moving up and down this ladder, you can't go from dorsal to ventral. You have to move up through sympathetic. And ventral is a place of regulation where you feel connected and social. Sympathetic is a place where you are feeling activated and in the fight or flight. And dorsal is the state of collapse. And so this autonomic ladder is a way to understand that system. And our goal with understanding our nervous system is to expand our window of tolerance. So I like to use this tool. And ideally, when we face a stressor, we want to be able to respond and then come back into regulation. And this happens by understanding our window of tolerance and challenging and expanding it. Otherwise, we are easily triggered into hyperarousal, and we get stuck here where we feel anxious, angry, out of control, and overwhelmed, or hypoarousal, where we feel depleted and burnt out and stressed. So the different stories that arise with each state, we'll start with ventral. In this state, we typically feel more creative, more positive. Hopefulness lies here. The world feels warm and welcoming. You're excited about new health journey, for example. And sympathetic, the stories that tend to arrive are feelings of unsafe. Maybe you feel like this is too much. I'm overwhelmed. I am anxious. I can't do this. They don't like me. The point of me sharing this is to show you that your state impacts your story and your narrative by which you view the world, other people, God, and yourself. And again, sympathetic is coming out of your spinal system and it's touching all of these organs. And so you can see how so many symptoms can arise. And ideally, you don't want to stay regulated all the time. You want to be able to go into a state of sympathetic energy when you're facing a stressor. Everybody's talking about being calm these days, but you want your body to respond. You don't want it to get stuck. Because again, when it gets stuck or you end up in a state of collapse, it impacts your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is that connection between your hypothalamus and your hormones. And then the stories that emerge with dorsal tend to be states of hopelessness, feeling alone, or like the world is heavy. And our goal is to build awareness and capacity, not avoid stress altogether, because we live in a broken and fallen world and there's no way to avoid all forms of stress. Some stress is good for us. Our goal is to be able to settle ourselves into regulation and oscillate between the states like expansion and contraction. Many of us live in a state of contraction and overwhelm. All right. And then neuroception is your surveillance system that is built in. And I want you to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to skip this because I think I'm going over. A little bit of time tuning into your neuroception. And so I want to show you 3 different pictures, and I want you to just notice what arises for you. So the reason I wanted to show you these pictures is because your neuroception can be impacted by your past experiences. For example, if you look at this picture of the bees, you could be someone who lost a loved one to bee stings. And so you see this picture and you're like, whoa, this triggers a lot of sadness inside of me. Or you could be someone who's a beekeeper and loves honey, and you're excited to see this picture. You could be someone that loves guacamole and can kill some queso like me, and you just love this photo that encaptures Mexican food. Or you could be someone that has new food allergies and can no longer eat avocados. And so this brings up a lot of sadness for you. You could be someone afraid of sharks or who loves to surf. And so that will bring up 2 different reactions in this last photo. The point of me sharing this is that your neuroception can misfire and misread in certain situations. And I'll give you an example. When I moved to Albania, the only thing I knew about it was the movie Taken. And so when I landed and no one smiled in that environment, I was picking up on cues of danger because I was like, they're not smiling. They look mean. What is happening? I went home that night and I went to bed, and there were gunshots at night, only they weren't really gunshots. They were fireworks. And so my neuroception was misreading that environment. Because what in actuality, Albanians just don't smile. It's not part of their culture like it is for Americans. And the fire or the gunshots that I thought were going off were actually fireworks for people's birthday. And so I misread that situation, and it wasn't until I tuned in and paused and said, okay, what is going on in my system right now? What story am I writing? And is it based in reality? And so by becoming aware of these different states and the stories, it will help you put a pause on your reactions rather than living in autopilot. So for example, maybe you binge eat, and instead of looking at yourself and being critical, another way to look at the situation is ask, what is my nervous system telling me? Maybe you came home after a really long day and you are craving certain foods and you need a dopamine hit. Maybe you're lacking minerals and nutrients and your body's craving salt or copper and you want dark chocolate and you're binging on it. And that could be a reason. What's going on in your environment? The point is to avoid the story of self-criticism and be a conscious, curious, compassionate observer of your everyday actions and behavior, because this is what will create new pathways and changes. And then the last one I wanted to mention was co-regulation. I'm not going to dive into this one, but this is the capacity to have deep connections with other people, and it's something that your nervous system is reliant on. We need more regulated and settled women in the world. And this often happens because so many women are living in a chronic state of stress and are not willing to tune in or not feeling capable or resourced enough to. And so it often starts with us being willing and curious about what we need for our own bodies and developing a map, or I like to call a regulation menu, so that we can go first and we can develop authentic communities where you feel like you can come undone and remove your mask and you're able to be vulnerable with people. Because when you are dysregulated, it is very easy to isolate, but isolation will keep you dysregulated. All right, so done with the lecture part. Let's go into different ways of activating regulating your nervous system. I'll talk about I'm teaching through a biblical lens, so I'll talk about breath prayers and dynamic self-touch and then brain spotting. So activating your vagus nerve, very trendy today, very popular. Sometimes we can make it overcomplicated, I think. And the vagus nerve, I'm not going to dive into it today, but it is a wandering nerve and it touches deep into the depths of your body and touches so many cells and organs. And there's different ways you can regulate. And one of the ways I love is singing with my church family, singing old hymns. Singing actually stimulates your vagus nerve. We have examples of that in scripture. When Paul and Silas were in prison, they were singing. And in co-regulation and community with other people, it nourishes our nervous system. And then breath prayers. There have been studies on prayer that show the impact of brain on your brain. There have been studies about breathing and how breathing sends a message of safety or unsafety to your body. I like to have clients do breath prayers before meals to stimulate the vagus nerve and support digestion. And then harnessing the power of touch. When you're a baby, you feel sensations in the womb. They actually used to think that babies didn't have pain or sensations, and they would perform surgeries on them, not realizing that babies can feel. When you're born, touch is how you're greeted into the world. It's needed to thrive as a baby. Preemies have been shown to have failure to thrive if they're not fully touched. And simply self-touch or not self-touch, touching them can help them thrive. We navigate the world through touch and pressure, and part of our nervous system is reliant on touch. How we bond is reliant on touch. It's a biblical concept. It can act as a social signal for safety to ourselves and to others, supports our mental and physical health. And our hands are incredibly designed and they're tools that we can use. They're connected to our brain via fascia and different sensory receptors. We have mechanoreceptors and sensory receptors that make us highly sensitive to movement, pressure, and temperature. They're tools that we forget to use when we're trying to find everything that will regulate. Sometimes we have to realize that it could just be attached to us. We live in an isolated world, especially after 2020. So it helps us reconnect and orient back to our bodies. And many women live overstimulated because of the touch they receive from their kids. It's more of a touch of want than a touch of safety and regulation. So it's something that you can give yourself. Your tissues react immediately to human touch. They soften and become less constricted. Your body becomes more aware of the area you're touching. It calms your amygdala, fight or flight response. It brings your prefrontal cortex back online, and it says, I'm here, I'm okay, I am in charge. So I want to do some different self-touch. It's called dynamic self-touch. It comes from the work of Sergio Ocampo, and I adapted his work and integrated with scripture. So the first one that we can do is you take one hand and place it behind your neck. If you think about cradling a baby, oftentimes we hold the baby here and it provides a calming and relaxing sensation for the baby and is a way to soothe, and it's something that we can apply to ourselves. And then you take your other hand and place it on your heart. And while you're here, notice the pressure of your hands and what it feels like to be contained in this moment. Notice the temperature of your skin, whether it's warm, cold. You can apply some stretch to this area, waking up those receptors. You can integrate scripture. I did this with a client yesterday who was very stressed about some protocols, and she was like, I wish I could take you to therapy with me. And I was like, you can do this on your own. This is your tool. I know it probably feels silly, but it works. And then cranial support, you can put one hand behind your head and the other on your forehead. And this isn't going to get rid of your thoughts, but it's going to slow them down. And then the last one is palming. You rub your hands together to create warmth. And then place them over your eyes. And this helps you when you get overstimulated to decrease the amount of sensory information that you're receiving. And again, you can integrate it with prayer, scripture. When to use it, you can use it to self-regulate throughout the day. It's helpful for practitioners in between sessions, emotional crisis resolution, navigating different narratives in your health history, and it helps amplify emotional processing. All right, so brain spotting. How are we doing?
Good. Chat's good. So, oh, Tori says, I'll be using the palming one a lot because overstimulation. Yes. That one felt really good. I was like, I like that one too.
Good, good. I'm glad you like that one. All right, so brain spotting is a healing modality that I use with one-on-one clients, and there's different ways of integrating it. One is when you work with a practitioner like me and I hold a space and frame for you. And another is a form of self-spotting where it is reliant on your eye position. And so it really is a way of regulating your nervous system using the tools that you already have within your body, which is why I love it. But you have something called an ocular cardiac nerve. And David Grand, who is the founder of Brain Spotting, was at a conference one year, and there was a man who was he was a neuro-optometrist, and he was studying different things that they were doing with clients and accidentally finding that they were very relaxing for the client. And the form of therapy that the neuro-optometrist was doing was called convergence therapy. And David Grand modified the concept and he integrated it with brain spotting for a practice called vergence. And so it's the capacity to use your eyes to converge, which means you look close, and then diverge, is when you look far. And what that does is it impacts your ocular cardiac nerve. And so, ocular cardiac reflex. So what you can do is use your thumb. You can use a pen. You can use lip gloss, whatever you want, really. I'm going to use a pointer because that's what I have here. And you want to go about 12 inches from your face. And your goal is to stare at what you have in front of you. And then look in the distance at something else for 10 seconds. So look in the distance for 10 seconds. And then look at your pen, or in my case, it's my pointer, for another 10 seconds. And then switch back to whatever you're looking at in the distance. In my case, it's a bamboo plant. And you want to switch back and forth between the two. And you can speed it up and go to 6 seconds. And then notice what happens in your body. So some people get really nauseous with this one, and if that's you, slow down how fast you're going. You can go as slow as you want or however fast you want. And what that does is it interrupts anxious thoughts. It has been shown to help with panic attacks, although I would practice it before you're actively having a panic attack, because you want to have these things on your back burner and know how to use them before your full-blown panic attack and like, this is dumb, I'm throwing it out. practice it. And I'll write it down, the directions, if you guys want that as well. So that's a little bit on brain spotting.
Yeah, that was cool. I definitely felt that. My body was like, like just sort of, like a wilting flower, like calm, like we're all so keep ourselves upright, so much like rigid upright. It was just like, I was like, so that's so cool. I will
Good.
definitely be doing that.
Good. I'm glad.
Tori's laughing.
Um,
Uh,
what's Tori laughing at?
I don't know. What were you laughing at, Tori?
The sound effects. I put it in the
Oh.
chat.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Yeah.
It's my bedtime.
Wilting
Okay,
flower.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'm almost done.
You're fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay, so the last things I want to leave you with is this is something that I teach my course students to do, and it's a pulse check, a rhythm check, a realignment check, and a renewal. The concept behind pulse check is that I used to be a cardiac step-down nurse, and if your pulse is going crazy, it impacts your overall health. And if your heart rhythm is out of rhythm, it impacts your overall health. And a lot of times we don't apply that concept to our everyday life and living. And so with your pulse check, you can ask a simple question like, what state have I spent the most time in today? And how has it been driving my actions, thoughts, and behaviors? For your rhythm check, it can be, how are my daily rhythms influencing my current state? Did I wake up in a rush and skip breakfast and down 3 coffees on an empty stomach? And that's why I felt anxious. This could or could not be a personal example. Done this before. I'm like, why am I anxious? That would be why. Realignment. This is, what shifts can I make in my day to reduce stress and realign with who I want to show up as? And then renewal, if you're a Christian, cover the process in prayer. The Holy Spirit helps us through sanctification, and that includes setting new health habits and rewiring our brain. So you cannot change without awareness. Your state, your feelings, and your behaviors all drive your story that you're living in each day. My recommended pathway for nervous system dysregulation moving forward: do an HTMA and a complete metabolic count and work with a practitioner to see where you are minerally, because it's so hard to regulate if you're depleted. Get on a good plan physically so that you can work on your emotional stressors. These are ways to regulate your nervous system, but the deep changes come when you actually get to know your internal story, your childhood, your attachment, your triggers. And that's where the Aligned and Renewed program comes in. It's self-paced and it helps set a steady foundation. And then use rapid relief along the way. Things like Vergence that I just taught you, targeted supplementation. This is just, I don't want to mention that because I want to respect your community. Now I didn't want to be inviting people to my membership on your membership. I mean, we can always do both, but I did want to invite you to a meeting and online spiritual retreat that my spiritual director and I are hosting in December. And it's just a way, it's 2 hours, and it's a way to connect with your mind and body and slow down and really connect with God and each other, in a place to feel seen, safe, and heard. I do spiritual direction with Missy Dabbs. She is a amazing minister's wife and has a master's degree in counseling, and just an incredible person. So there's 8 spots left. If you want to join, email me and I'll send that over. And with that, that's all I got. Any questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is so good.
You're welcome. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
good. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can come on your microphone too if you want. Any related questions that you have for Megan?
And then I put everyone to sleep.
Everyone might be very relaxed.
Just very relaxed. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is good, you know.
Yeah.
Just good.
It looks like we have a question from Caroline. Okay, so things to do when feeling like I'm in fight or flight are the I one and the palming question mark.
Yes.
But I already forgot the names. You know, names are hard. It's okay.
Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. What I would say for that is when you're in fight or flight, really before getting to that state is experimenting with what works for you, because for some people, palming is super relaxing. For others, it's like triggering. So I don't want to say do this for fight or flight. I would say experiment with it, the different ones that we did today, and then see what works for you. But yeah, those can definitely be used for the fight or flight and feeling anxious and panic, especially the vergence. I'm assuming by I1, that's what we meant, right? The vergence.
Okay, we have another one here from Laura, and she says, not a specific question, but do you have any thoughts on POTS or other forms of dysautonomia where one is not able to self-regulate their nervous system?
Well, again, it really depends on how you view the body. And so when I hear you say that you are unable to self-regulate, I would kind of play around with that story and narrative, because a lot of people believe that they're unable to self-regulate, but it's because they've been told that. So is it something you've been told, or if it's something you've experienced? But if it's something that you feel like you cannot self-regulate, I would do something like body work, like myofascia, or the CFT that Margaret teaches, where someone can hold space for you and help you with your nervous system as well. Sometimes different forms of the POTS and the dysautonomia really need more one-on-one work, not just working alone, if that makes sense. And make sure you're checking in with those minerals. A lot of mineral imbalances can be a driver for that, especially sodium and potassium. And make sure you have a plan, mineral support, and then you're working on the emotions and then checking in to see what else you need to do to self-regulate. These are just examples. There's a lot of different things out there. So I don't know if that was helpful or not.
Yeah, that's great. And I love what you mentioned too with the minerals, because that is something I've been thinking about recently too, is like all those patterns we see on the HTMA and how you can kind of quickly see like, oh, I'm in that unhealthy parasympathetic or in the unhealthy sympathetic state. It's very interesting to like compare that, or even look back at mine and know the season that I was in and how I was feeling back then, and then being like, oh yeah, that definitely added up. Like it lines up with how I was feeling. So based on that, it's just uncanny how like it just speaks right into that. So from that biochemicals perspective. So
for sure. And then especially with this doesn't really apply to her question, but with the calcium shell, a lot of patients are very parasympathetic dominant with that. And it's just helpful to know, because when you start to break those mineral patterns, some people get like a sudden surge of energy and anxiety, and they're like, I don't know what to do with this, but it's because your body is coming back online. And that's where having this awareness and preparing can be so helpful.
Yes, that was definitely me with the calcium shell, where it just sort of like, whoa, something changed. Or I remember actually one time I had a client who had broken up the calcium shell, had been working on it. And then this was when I was working on my own with one-to-one, and she came back, emailed me a couple months later. And she had previously expressed how there's a lot of things in her life she wanted to change, but she just couldn't, just kind of, again, hitting the wall. And she emails me back. She's like, hey, so I moved to a different city. I quit the job that I didn't like. I got a different job. And I'm just like, can't wait to see your retest. And I see the retest, and it's like calcium shell gone, all these minerals are up. And I'm like, there we go. Like it gave her the ability and the bandwidth to make those big changes. It was just like, who are you and what did you do with, this other person? And I'm sure you see that too with even like seeing people over time being like, wow, is this even the same person, from last time or even last session? You're like, whoa, they've really changed, so it's very cool.
That's one of my favorite parts of doing this work, especially when their friends and family start noticing too. And it's just such a beautiful
Yeah,
process.
because you're close enough to see it like up close and be like, whoa, wow, something's changed. So
Definitely.
Oh, yeah, and Caroline has a question here. She says, another question, I've been dealing with postpartum rage, mom rage. Any tips or things to do in the moment to regulate? That's a great question.
So again, I would make sure that your sodium to potassium ratio is in check, because a lot of times that is off with the rage. And then the tips to do in the moment to regulate I would do the self-touch. And a lot of times, do you have any other kids? Because they will mirror you. If your baby's brand new, obviously not going to mirror you. But the self-touch and the Virgins I would use personally, and then checking those minerals. If you're depleted or if your sodium and potassium's off, it will trigger the rage.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of, have you, I'm sure you listened to this, I think it's Corey Malloy, Freely Rooted, their new podcast that they have been doing, where they're talking about the mirroring, and it's like, this explains everything, where you're like, oh, kids are taking after me. That's why if you're having a bad day, the kids, that's what happens around here. I'm stressed or having a bad day, and the kids, they pick up on that. It's just crazy how you just not even saying a word. And my one who's more sensitive is like, what's going on? What's wrong? It's so crazy.
The things to do in the moment are really hard because it varies person to person. That's why it's so helpful to develop a menu and be doing these things on a regular basis. That way you kind of know what to pull from. So Caroline, I don't like, if I knew you, I would give like some more deeper suggestions, but the things that I shared today, I think would be helpful to just experiment with.
Yeah, I love that about pulling. Oh yeah, Caroline says, just listen to the Kids Are Mirrors Corey Malloy episode. Yes. Oh, I know, Caroline. That's the other thing, is that then you get the mom guilt where you're like, oh no, it's yeah, that's actually, and that's funny, Caroline, because I remember when I first heard that concept, I immediately was like, oh man, like it's comes back to me. And then I was like, oh, that's cool that it comes back to me. It's kind of like I eventually started to switch, because it is hard. You're like, oh man, I set the tone for everybody in the home. Why does it have to be me that's, the one that sets the tone for everybody? So I totally get that too, where it's like that feeling of like, it does all come back to me, but also it's great that it does, because I can, be the one to set the tone, but it is hard. It's hard being a leader, in the home. So
Yeah, definitely. And in my program, I teach about self-compassion, because sometimes it can be really easy to spin in the shame when you start learning different things. And really coming back to, you have been doing so good and the best that you could do with the knowledge that you've had up until that moment. And then when you learn more, you can do better. But that doesn't mean that you're a terrible mom. It just means that you had certain resources that have been given to you over the years. And it really helped me have compassion for my own mother, because I'm like, wow, she went through a lot. No reason she did this and this in her own history. So I think remembering the self-compassion piece can be really regulating too.
for sure. Yeah. Oh, good. Caroline says this is also helpful to hear. Yay.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
it is, because it is definitely very fascinating how that all connects together. Just family ecology, nervous system, all that. It's just very, very cool.
Any other favorite mantras or self-talk verses for shame and perfectionism? Ooh, that's a good one. There's actually a really good book called, I think it's Soul of Shame. by, I'm blanking on the title, but Margaret, I can text it to you when I look it up. But it's really good into digging into the shame and perfectionism and integrates verses that I think would be really helpful, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Is it Kurt Thompson, the
Yes.
author? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'll put that in the chat. Of shame, Kurt. Yeah, that looks good. I'm gonna add that to my list. My growing library list of books.
I feel you.
That's my toxic habit, is like, I'm gonna read this book and that book, and the other books on my shelf are like, how about read us first?
Yeah.
I have to have like multiple ones, because if I'm not in the right mood, you know, if you're not in the right mood to consume that material that's in the book, then it's just not, you know, I have my different moods that I want to read in.
Yeah,
Margaret,
definitely.
you read like 5 books a week, I'm pretty sure.
No, I don't.
Like, you're the
What happened?
fastest reader I know.
No, I'm not. My mom is the fastest one. She read the entire Les Mis, the whole thing unabridged, in like a few weeks.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
she was like, oh, it's not
Yeah.
as, you know, I was reading a little slower than usual. I'm like, Mom, you read the whole, like 1,000 pages of this book, you know, in a few weeks. And what's really interesting is I used to have a lot of trouble, because I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 8. Like, my mom took me to the doctor. They're like, she has ADHD. Let's put her on medication. Went on medication. My mom was like, I don't feel like I can keep doing this, because it just depressed my personality. She's like, it just put it like 0.25 of what my normal, you know, percentage would be of how I was. And so she actually, you know, I went off of that, and then she found ways to help me, you know, help me cope with that. But it's really interesting, because that, with the reading books, I used to not be able to sit and read a book. It just used to be, I can't do it. It's just, I gotta like move around or something. I just can't sit here and read a book. And something changed over the last 5 years, where it's like, I can sit and read and comprehend, and it's not just like I've got to listen to it on audiobook. So instead of just reading it, I can actually view it. So I'm sure I had something going on there that was like major dysregulation, to where it was hard for me to like sit and read. But it's something that has improved, and I think it, you know, who knows if it's the nervous system or the minerals, or like a combination of those two. But it's interesting that it, you know, resolved, and now I can actually sit and read and not, you know, feel like I'm going crazy. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah.
Any other questions for Megan? Alright. Megan, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
Yes, this week.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah.
Good.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.